Hello and welcome. This is episode number 2 on The Gardener, a short story written by P. Lankesh. In the previous episode, we discussed the difference between competition and rivalry. And also, we discussed what are the factors that motivate the life of a human being other than competition and rivalry. These two questions are discussed in the context of the story that we are going to read. In this story, The Gardener, there are two characters, Tamanna and Baswaya. There is a competition between these two. The competition turns out to be a rivalry. When competition turns out to be a rivalry, it stops or kills the inner peace of human beings. It disturbs lives. Rivalry is a thing that keeps bothering the person, haunting, disturbing the inner peace. It happened to these two. How did they deal with that? What happened to the characters in the story? How vengefulness, how hatred, how unhealthy competition, all these things kill human being within. How they disturb the inner peace of human beings. The story throws a light upon all these aspects. Let us read the story and try to understand if you have all these factors in the story. The Gardener by P. Lankesh. This is an English translation, mind you. Let us read. Elaboration can only impoverish this account and make it less authentic. I conceived this story in a flash. It has its genesis. It has its origin in my chance encounter with an old man. Elaboration can only impoverish. This story has a typical narration. The narrator takes up the narration and begins to narrate the story, leaves it in the hand of the character, one of the characters. Once again, takes it away from him and continues narrating or concludes the story. We must observe these multiple narrations that we have, a typical narration of the story. Elaboration, expansion, or speaking in detail about the story would make the story less authentic. It will make the story poor. So without much elaboration, story should be told. It has its origin, the narrator says, in a chance encounter with an old man. He met an old man by chance, accidentally. Looking at this person, that this story happened in a flash. He was standing in a coconut grove near Chennarayapattu. His eyes were stuffed with strange memories and a native intelligence. He stood there, a tall figure, hair gone grey, a long beak-like nose, and strong muscular arms. In one hand, a spade used to tend coconut trees, a newspaper tucked under his arm in another hand. He was a laborer, overseer, and a philosopher, all rolled into one, and a philosopher, all rolled into one. Very impressive old man. The narrator describes this person, who is a very impressive old man. The moment you look at him, you are attracted, because there is something strange about this person. He had a spade in one hand, a newspaper on the other. This only suggests that this man knows this world, or is a man who wants to understand the world. He wants to know what's happening around him. So he has a newspaper. He's interested in the worldly affairs around him. Suffer with strange memories and native intelligence. Looking at that person, you would understand there is some wisdom lying in this man. Very attractive at the same time, tall figure, and strong muscular arms. These things make or made the narrator be impressed about this person. So he was in a farm. He was a overseer, a laborer, a supervisor, overseer. He looked a philosopher. It was a combination of all these things, all of them rolled into one. So this man came. This man came to the garden, one of the gardens, and became a gardener. He came to this garden one day after walking hundreds of miles. That means he left his place to find a job for himself. And that place he left is far away from the place that he is working at the moment. And he came to a garden. The owner of this plantation needed a person exactly like him. After he came to the garden, one of the owners was in need of an overseer, a laborer kind of a person. The owner of this plantation, that plantation, was in need of that kind of a person, exactly like him. A few words were exchanged. The old man stayed on. After talking to this old man, the owner, after talking to this old man, gave him a job, because a couple of words would make people understand what they are, where they stay. If you have a conversation with the person, if you are wise enough, you will understand what the person is, where he stands, and what are his strengths and weaknesses. What kind of a person he or she is, that you will come to know after a brief conversation. Couple of words were exchanged, and the owner was convinced that this man would suit the plantation, so he was hired. He was taken to the job. He was really useful. He was well versed in agriculture, and he could understand the problems of workers very well. He could manage. The petty thefts in the garden came to an end after the overseer, after the gardener came to the garden. People who used to steal things from the garden stopped them. So the petty thefts stopped. The income from the garden improved dramatically, because there is a proper overseer now. He could stop the thefts as well. So there is a work properly done. So income of the garden increased. There was a perceptible change in the lifestyle of the owner. What happened now? What happened now is a strange thing. The owner changed quite a lot. Perceptible, noticeable change is witnessed in the behavior of the owner. There was a perceptible change. The plantation expanded, but the owner became lethargic, because everything was looked after by the old man. He had nothing else to do. He stopped his involvement. His wife, the owner's wife, found all this very strange. How could he become like that all of a sudden after the overseer joined the garden? The owner changed quite a lot. What worried her? There was a perceptible, noticeable change that worried her. She found it hard to decide whether the old man's arrival was for good or it was for worse. Is it good thing that happened to them, the arrival of the gardener, or was that the bad thing that happened to them? She could not make it out. Her husband's wealth and social prestige had risen higher because he was growing rich. The plantation was growing better. There is a dramatic change in the income. So his social prestige was also growing along with that. He acquired a number of friends in the next town and an equal number in his own village. When people grow rich, sometimes it happens. They behave like a magnet and they could attract people. And there are people who would go beyond such people as well for their own interests and benefits. It happened that he acquired a quite good number of people. What worried the owner's wife is not the number of people he or the friends he acquired within and inside and outside the village, but she became worried about the another thing. Even though he had a precious little to do, his life became crowded with the colorful events. What does it mean? Though the owner was not doing anything, but he was doing one thing, that he was adding up more color to his life. She became apprehensive about his adultery and umpteen other wives cultivated lately thanks to his newly acquired cloth. What happened with this person? He got involved in an adultery, something which owner's wife could not digest. And there are many more unimaginable number of bad things that he was actually doing. Not virtues, vices. He's all cultivated off late because he got himself completely free. The gardener is looking after the garden very well. This old man is taking care of it. So the owner got himself involved in other activities. So their farm, which was merely 10 acres, had grown beyond their imagination. That was fine, but their life was also gradually getting out of hand. After the gardener came to the garden, it happened that the plantation improved, the area expanded, they are growing rich, but their life, at least from the point of view of the owner's wife, because she is thinking, she is worried, she could observe what is happening. So she felt that way, that life is slipping out of their hands, that is getting out of their hands. So this happened. The owner's wife is worried for the above said reasons. It happened one day when she was in a fix like that, in a fix. She was troubled by these thoughts. She was disturbed by the behavior of her husband. the old man met her. The old man, the gardener, met this lady and behaved as though he knew all about her plight. How is that he could understand all these things? You must have observed in the beginning, the narrator says, this man is very intelligent, has the native intelligence, wisdom. He could understand what's happening. So he smiled at her and brought down an offering of a tender coconut to her from the nearby tree. He sat on the embankment of the well. She had no alternative but to sit next to him. The sun was slipping away into the western horizon. His rays were reaching the walls of the well through the foliage of coconut, mango, and jackfruit trees. It is in the evening, or it is at the time where he could see the owner's wife could listen to him. So the old man came to her and began to speak to her sympathetically, as if he understood everything what is happening in her life. So she too inevitably sat next to him just to respect his old age. At that point of time, the old man began his narration. I told you in the beginning, there is a multiple narration or a typical narration where the narrator begins to narrate and leaves it to one of the characters and takes it away from him. The old man began his narrative. Looking at this old lady, the old man began to tell her something, but through a narrative. In a far-off place, once there was a man called Tamanna. He had everything. 10 acres of wetland, a comfortable house, people too ready to do his bidding. The most important among all his possessions was his rival, Sangoji. This is how the old man began. Remember, the owner's wife was worried and sitting in a fix. She is sitting worried, and this old man comes out and talks to this lady and begins to narrate this story. Something strange, actually. Whether she was interested in listening to that story, what does he mean to narrate a story to the owner's wife? He does not speak anything directly, but he begins to narrate a story. This may have the relevance to her particular plight at the moment, but we don't know. But he began to narrate the story. He said, in a far-off place there was someone called Tammana. He had everything in his life, comfortable house. There were people who were ready to do his service. And most importantly, he had most important property or a possession, that his rival, Sangoji. He said he had a rival. Tamanna had a rival. His name was Sangoji, and that was the most important asset in his life than a house, a comfortable house, or people who were ready to do anything for him, and well-to-do. He was well-to-do, but those things did not matter. What mattered to him the most was his rival. He had a rival. See, a man who has no enemy is not a man. There is a saying. A man who has no enemy is not a man. There are bound to be an enemy for every man. But how do you deal with that enemy? That matters. How do you take it to how do you take it to yourself and deal with it? That matters a lot. So we learned that Tamanna had a rival in the name of Sangoji. This is how the old man began to narrate the story to the owner of the garden or owner's wife. He began to he began to narrate this story to the owner's wife. Does she listen to him? What is the significance of this story? What was the need to narrate this story to the owner's wife? What does this old man mean? And we will know that in our next episode.